This is the last lesson in the series, The Big Ten. I kind of expected an outpouring like the old Johnny Carson show there, where he would say it's the last of something and everybody would clap and it'd be over. But this is the last lesson because this is the 10th of the Big Ten Commandments. And it's the one that, hey, I suppose every one of us have broken at some time or another. It seems like it would be hard to be human and not at some point have broken this particular commandment. So it reads like this. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So let's break that down just a little more. You must not cover your neighbor's house, even if it is in a brand new fine subdivision with an Olympic-style swimming pool and its own pickleball court. I don't get it, but everybody else does. And a 3-car garage and stainless steel appliances and wood floors and a kitchen with countertops to die for. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, even if she goes out and picks up the newspaper in her flimsy pajamas, even if she sunbathes in the driveway wearing a bikini. You must not covet your neighbor's wife. You must not covet your neighbor's male or female servant, the guy who works for the landscape company and services all of your neighbor's hires, the guy that sprays for weeds, the guy who mows his grass, the guy who paints your house, the guy who fixes your car. You must not covet your male or female worker. You shall not covet your neighbor's female servant or the girl from Maid Brigade that your neighbor brings in to clean her house every other week. No, don't covet that. You must not covet your neighbor's ox or the new John Deere riding mower that your neighbor recently bought, Jack Johnson, even if it's got a nice hot and warm cup holder right next to the cushy sheet. You must not, Jack, covet it. And when you see all of this, remember what God thunders down from Mount Sinai. Let it ring in your ears just to sort of sum up everything else he said, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So the 10th Commandment specifically mentions your neighbor's house, wife, servants, ox, donkey, but the list was never intended to be comprehensive. The items in verse 17 are suggestive, not exhaustive, so he ends with one all-inclusive, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. And that doesn't just include material things. Neither should you covet somebody's looks. Neither should you covet somebody's brain, their way with words. Neither should you covet somebody's athletic skill. Neither should you covet somebody's sense of humor or their station in life, how they've made it compared to how you have made it, or their friendships, or their talents, or for those of you who play golf, their golf game. Now look, before we go any further in a deep examination of this verse, I think it's important to say this to start. Don't misunderstand. There is nothing wrong with us wanting nice things, with working hard, with saving your money, with purchasing amenities that will better your life. Nothing wrong with that. The Bible knows absolutely nothing of asceticism or sacrifice just for sacrifice's sake. Austere living isn't necessarily a mean to godliness. poverty doesn't equal piety. It really doesn't. We talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about the monastics. Instead, the Bible clearly teaches us to richly enjoy everything God has given us to enjoy. So take the list again. There's nothing wrong with you wanting a house, as long as it's not your neighbor's house specifically, or his lake house. If you're single, there is nothing wrong with desiring to have a wife. In fact, Proverbs 18 teaches, the man who finds a wife finds a treasure, and he receives favor from the Lord. That's a good thing. Just make sure that the wife you find is not your neighbor's wife. Kind of important there. There's nothing wrong with desiring a new car or a dream vacation or a promotion or a raise. Just make sure it is not your neighbor's. The way I thought would be best to maybe illustrate that in this day and time for most people is there's nothing wrong with wanting a fancy, brand new, top of the line, highest technology cell phone. But here's what happens. We're not even thinking about a new cell phone. We're more than happy with the old one we've got. I've still got a 12. And we're more than happy with the one we've got until we see somebody else's new cell phone. And it's got a color screen, and it's razor thin, and it's got like 14 cameras in it. And they're showing me all the tricks that it will do. And rather than be happy for our friend that they were able to purchase a nice, brand new, top-of-the-line cell phone, we get angry and upset that theirs is better than ours. It's not fair. I've got to have one. I have coveted that cell phone. Now, that's on a small scale. That's called covetousness. That's a desire born out of selfishness and pride. And James chapter 1 provides us sort of the anatomy of covetousness. Here's how it develops. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. So don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. Sin, even covetousness, always begins with a thought in the brain, with a desire, and then eventually leads to the act. Rather than walk in the will of God and trust Him for our blessings and all that we need, we're drawn away, the text says, by desire and enticed. We want it now when God says, wait. We say yes when God says no. We say mine when God says His. A desire, though maybe not sinful in and of itself, can end up sinful when it forces me outside of God's will and to ignore the welfare of other people and to want what they have. Here are a few good definitions of the word covet or covetousness. It's to crave, to yearn for, to hanker after something that belongs to someone else. Here's another definition. It's a consuming desire to possess in a wrong way something belonging to another. And I'm most challenged by that great author Haddon Robinson's definition of covetous that says it's craving more of what you have enough of already. It's the desire for more and more and more and even more. You might say it this way. Covetousness is an obsession with possession. And almost always underneath it is the thought that if I just get this, I'll be happy. That if I just get this, it will bring me pleasure. Hey, I know. I've been there. I've had that temptation. I've given in to that temptation. I know it's true. And that's why the specific warning the Lord Jesus himself gave about covetousness is so important. In Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 15, Jesus said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." And just before that, he had told them in King James, New King James, and I believe even in the NIV, he had told them, beware of covetousness. So he is telling them specifically a story about covetousness, but he is setting it up with a statement saying, beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Covetousness is born out of a false assumption. It is the heretical belief that the more of a commodity, the more wealth, the more money, the more beauty, the more of an activity or more attention from people, those things will bring me more happiness. And when it doesn't, that false belief just drives me to get even more, even if it means taking it from my neighbor or taking it from somebody else. In that sense, covetousness is expecting too much out of this life. It's asking material things and temporal experiences and human relationships to produce spiritual results in our life. And that's not what God ever intended. That's why it's one of the big 10. And that's why it's listed with such things as thou shalt worship no other God other than me, for I am a jealous God. That's why it's listed among commandments like that draw us. So the first 4 commandments draw us closer to God. So does a lack of covetousness. Covetousness draws us further away from God. As I've said so many times from this spot, physical stuff will never meet a spiritual need. Nothing wrong with it. Glad you have it if you have it. Wish you had more. Never jealous of it. That's one thing God has blessed me with. Just understand, physical stuff will not satisfy a spiritual need. Never will. Here's a thought to chew on for a while, okay? If I get what I'm longing for and I'm still longing, then what I was longing for was not really what I was longing for. Did you get that? It's true. It's true. Now, in Luke chapter 12, after Jesus warned them to beware of covetousness, life is not measured by the amount of stuff you have, he then told them a story, as he often liked to teach in parables. He said, a rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. It's not as if he didn't already have plenty. He was already a rich man. I think it's the King James Version, I believe, that calls him a noble man. The word noble in that day and time, and to some degree still does today, can today in some cultures, meant wealthy, well off. So this was a man who was noble. He was rich. And he decided that he wanted to build more barns. What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops. I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and goods. It's not as if he already did not have plenty. He said that himself. He was a rich man. He had nobility. He had barns already. You could call him Barnes and Noble. You really could. But he is going to demolish his barns so that he can build bigger barns. A regular store was not enough. He wanted a superstore. A regular Walmart was not enough. He wanted a super Walmart. And notice, this man never gives God any of the credit or thanks to God for the abundant harvest that he's had. The story started off with, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. Well, who does he think set in motion that cycle of life? Who ultimately was responsible for the growth of his crops? Well, apparently he thinks him and only him. And he wants to leave God completely out of the equation. Now, God might have given him an increased crop so he could bless other people rather than just himself, but that's nowhere in what the man says. Nowhere in. He just wants more for himself so that he'll have enough room to restore his wheat and other goods, and he'll be able to sit back and say to myself, see, he's not saying this to anybody else, he's not helping anybody else, so that I may sit back and say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. God wanted him to feed other people rather than just fill more barns waiting to fill his stomach. But the sin of covetousness ignores two things, two very important things. It ignores God's will, who made it one of the Big Ten, and it ignores people's welfare. And we are blessed to bless others. An obsession with possession runs absolutely roughshod on what God wants and what other people need. So, verse 19 reveals exactly what he was thinking. I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods made up for many years. Notice he was talking to himself. I can remember from the time I was young, when my mother told me, son, do not talk to yourself. That's a sign of crazy people. He's talking to himself. He's not talking to God. He trusts in goods, not God. He thinks stuff will satisfy his soul. His plan is to just kick back and relax. But God interrupts the conversation that he is having with himself. He's not even talking to God. This ought to scare us all to death, by the way. This ought to tell us a whole lot about the omniscience of God and the omnipotence of God. He's not talking to God. He's talking to himself. And God interrupts his conversation anyway. Now, that's some kind of power. When you can interrupt a conversation you are not even in and is not intended to you. And God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? And dying this very night pulls the plug on covetousness. Death is like that. Once you die, you suddenly don't want anything else, do you? Other than to maybe be alive. And here, my friends, is the height of foolishness. We all know we have a date with death. We all know our time on earth is nothing more than preparation for eternity. So why spend our whole lives hoarding and storing up what we already know we can't take with us anyway. And so Jesus draws the lesson from his story. Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. So you can add to the problems of covetousness that it is short-sighted thinking. It's wanting to have it all now with no regard for what really counts, the will of God and the welfare or the good of others. It's the belief, if I can just get the next best thing, I'll be satisfied. And then if I can just get the next best thing after that, I'll be satisfied. And I can sit down and kick back my heels and say, take, eat, drink, and be merry, and enjoy your life. That's what the dead fool said. Yet we so think it'll work for us. We think the next thing we want, that's going to be the ticket to happiness. So we scrape and we save, or we run up the credit cards at 18% interest to achieve our goal, and when we get what we want, we wonder if it made any difference at all. We as adults are like little kids on Christmas morning. They tear open a box and they're so excited to see this thing, and they don't give it 5 seconds, do they? If there's another box over there with their name on it. And then another box after that. And before long, they're bored with all of it. And we think we have grown out of that. And we're kidding ourselves. Proverbs 27:20 says, just as death and destruction are never satisfied, so human desire is never satisfied. In other words, we're always going to have a little bit of this with us. We're always going to have a little bit of this little spirit to covet with us. Human desire is never satisfied. Now, let me give you the good side of that, okay? The good side of that is all human desire is not evil. So, I mean, in the context of what we've been talking about this morning, you read that statement and you say, so human desire is never satisfied, and you think, well, he's talking completely about covetousness, and this is all in the negative. No, no, no. Not all desire is evil. There's such a thing as good coveting. Have you ever said to somebody, when you were in trouble and needed help, I covet your prayers? That's good coveting, is it not? Have you ever said to somebody that you had just met, maybe right that day or just a few weeks earlier, and your relationship with them had grown, and you say, I covet your friendship? That's a good thing. That's human desire in a good way. Have you ever said to God, I covet your blessing on my life? I have. That's a good thing. No, you don't covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's stuff or your neighbor's workers or anything else your neighbor has, but you can covet your prayers. You can covet your neighbor's friendship. You can covet God's blessings in your life. In 1 Corinthians 12:31, Paul is speaking of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And in chapter 12, all through chapter 12, he describes the varying gifts of the Holy Spirit. I don't know how many there are. There's somewhere between 16 and 19, depending on how many of them that you count as gifts. And he gets to the end of that chapter, and he's going to show you a more excellent way. And that is the lead-in to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the great chapter on love. Those are the next words, or the words on love in chapter 13. But notice how he introduced that. But covet earnestly the best gifts. And that's where he's going to give us. These three remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Don't covet the gifts of speaking in tongues, he's saying back in chapter 12. Don't covet the gifts, the other spiritual gifts, 15, 16, 17 of them there. If you want to covet the best gifts. And here's coming the best gifts: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. That kind of coveting is good. The Ten Commandments does not forbid all coveting. Only coveting what is in short supply and belongs to somebody else. Evil coveting is selfish desire that cares nothing about God's will, that cares nothing about somebody else's welfare. It's all about me. It reminds me of the woman and her son who were walking through the forest one day when they were caught in the path of a tornado. And the woman clung to a tree with one hand and to her son with the other. And we've all heard stories like this, but the strong winds became so strong that they swept the boy away. And after the storm had subsided, the woman wept and begged and cried out to God, "Father in heaven, please give me my boy back, and I'll do anything for you. Please give me my boy back, and I will serve you for the rest of my life." And suddenly, the boy fell out of the sky and plopped down right at her feet. And the woman picked up her son, looked him over, and then with an agitated expression on her face said, "He had a hat on, Lord." Some folks so discontented that they miss the mighty works that God has done and the blessings that he has given because of a few details we think he might have shorted us. So, to help you with this matter of covetousness, I want you to take in the statistics I'm about to give you, which are absolutely true. If you're an American living in 2025, that's you, right? You're living. One or two of you, boy, I don't know. You look kind of strung out from last night. But anyway, if you're an American living in 2025, you are among the top 99.4% of the richest people who have ever lived on this planet. Not now, just now, who have ever lived on this planet. You're in the upper 1% of the estimated 80 billion people who have lived on this planet. Yet the prosperity we enjoy is not enough. Our whole economy is based on covetousness. My son Scott likes to camp and he likes outdoor stuff and he doesn't like all the technology that kids are having, and fortunately he's got 3 kids. That did not come out well at first there, did it? Unfortunately he's got 3, but he's got 3 kids, but they love technology, and so he has gotten in the habit of trying about once a month to take them camping for 1 or 2 nights. And they can't have any of their technology stuff out there with them, and they have to live on the land, and they have to just do things that land people do. It sounds utterly miserable. I tell you, he's been 3 times recently, and he did invite his mother to go, and I called him and just thanked him to the high heavens that he did not invite his father to go. But he's doing it because he wants them to learn how to fish, learn how to hunt, learn how to do things with their hands. I'm going to tell you a story about that a little later this morning in the sermon. And so he's doing it for those reasons, because the whole economy otherwise is built on covetousness. We have an entire industry called advertising that specializes in creating discontent in your heart. It is a science. It is a science. They know exactly what to do, what kind of music to play, what kind of words to say, what kind of images to show. And they had me almost convinced a couple of weeks ago during a football game I was watching that this toothpaste would make me happy. I did not know I was unhappy. And they had me almost convinced in the middle of a football game to go buy this toothpaste, and then I would be happy. It's just toothpaste. And yet, we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. That's covetousness. And here's the problem for all of us. It takes so much more to satisfy us today than it did yesterday. That's a whole lot of the problem. 20 or 30 years ago, if you made what you're making today, you'd be the happiest person on the planet. And I realize inflation is taking its toll. But the bigger problem is not the inflation of prices, but the inflation of our desires. That's the whole thought behind the Tenth Commandment. God made us, knows what we're like. That's the whole thing that Jesus was warning about in Luke chapter 12 with the Barnes and Noble guy. So I'll give you another statistic. Here's another statistic for you, okay? Those of you who were an adult or a teenager back in this time will be able to readily see that this is true. A typical grocery store in 1976 stocked 9,000 items. That sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Shouldn't we all be able to get by at the grocery store with 9,000 choices? Today, the typical American grocery store, like Publix across the street, stocks over 40,000 products and choices. Our wants, our needs have increased. Epictetus in 100 AD said, contentment comes not so much from great wealth as from few wants. Now, if that's right, and I think it is, that means we are all in control of our contentment. And that means we can all be in control of our covetousness. That's what that means. Here's the problem with more stuff. It only stuffs. It stuffs us for a little while so we don't have to think about what really matters in life. It stuffs us so we don't have to answer the deep down cry of our hearts and what our real needs are, which are spiritual. And we get so much stuff. Have you been amazed like I have as we drive around Lee County as if we weren't crowded enough already here in Lee County with building on our lands and our roads, that it seems like every couple of miles a new storage facility has been built? How many more storage facilities and car washes do we need? Well, we got to get all these cars washed. We're coveting these car washes apparently because they don't build them unless you're going. And these storage units, how much stuff do we have, for goodness sakes? And then we find out what we're truly longing for is not that. Our covetousness will not make us any happier. You know what we're truly longing for? The three things that remain: faith, hope, love. If you have the greatest things that remain, the three greatest are faith, hope, and love, you really don't need anything else. And if you don't have faith, hope, and love, you will spend your whole life searching for love in all the wrong places. That was a song, I believe. Where's Phil Turner? He'll know. Wasn't that a song, Phil? Yeah, I think it was. Money makes for a good servant, but a cruel master. Live for money, and you will never satisfy your boss. As Paul said to Timothy, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered far from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows, and I know some of them. I know some of them personally. Now, the opposite of covetousness is contentment, and that should be the goal of every Christian. It's not in the Big Ten, but it's in the New Testament over and over again. It fills Philippians chapter 4, being content with whatever you have. Paul said, I've had plenty and I've had nothing. I've been well fed and I've been hungry. I know what it is to be content in each and every circumstance, he said. And then after that is when he said, the very next word is when he said, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. One of the most misquoted, misapplied, taken out of context verses in the entire Bible. Because what he is talking about there is not that you can do anything you set your mind to. What he's talking about there is you can do exactly what he had just said. You can learn how to be content in any and every circumstance. And that's the goal for every Christian. So let's decide in advance to be a contented person rather than a coveted person. To seek the peace of God, not just a piece of the pie. To only want what God wants for me and my family. To seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And all these other things will be given to you as well. I hope we realize that. I hope we realize that our net worth has absolutely nothing to do with our self-worth. Success in God's eyes is being so in love with Jesus that He alone is all we need. We seek first His kingdom. We let our conduct be without covetousness, and we are content with such things as you have. There's the contrast right there the Hebrew writer gave us in Hebrews 13:5. The exact contrast I've been talking about. The opposite of covetousness is contentment. So let your conduct be without covetousness and be content with whatever you have. You see, with Jesus, there is no downside. He satisfies me spiritually. He knows exactly what I need physically. His blessings free me, not trap me. His blessings make me contented, not covetous. I'll tell you a great story to conclude this lesson, include this series. It's a true story, believe it or not. There was a thief named Danny Simpson who robbed a bank in Ottawa, Canada. He used a .45 caliber Colt semi-automatic pistol in the robbery, and he made off with $6,000, but he was caught shortly afterwards, within a day, and he spent 6 years in jail. But unbeknownst to Danny, the pistol he used in the heist was an antique made by the Ross Rifle Company in 1918. It was auctioned by the police after they recovered it for $100,000. The pistol Simpson used was worth more than 16 times what he got from the robbery. If only Danny Simpson had realized he already had what he thought he needed. How often is that us? And so we end with these inspiring words from Paul. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future, so that they may experience true life. Total opposite of covetousness, secret to contentment.